Thanks for joining, Greg. It's really great to have you on here today. Thank you so much for your time. So, today I am joined by Greg Beazley, Senior Marketing Operations Manager at Employment Hero, someone who I've personally had the privilege of working closely with on a Marketo Measure project over the last several months. So, Greg, thanks for joining. And let's just dive right in. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about your real experience. What we want to start with is before we started the project, how would you describe the state of your Marketo Measure setup and kind of what was it really preventing you from being able to do?
I'd say that our instance of Marketo Measure had some initial implementation done to it, but it was done a few years before my time. And so when no one was using it, basically, we had this product, nothing was being done with it. We were pretty much just reliant on first touch and last touch attribution, relying on Marketo fields and Salesforce campaign memberships, and it did its job to a degree, but nowhere near as accurate as what Marketo Measure can achieve.
And that sounds pretty familiar for a lot of the organizations we work with. So, was there any kind of specific internal pressure, either from specific people or just specific needs of the business, that really prompted you all to prioritize getting it working?
Yeah, I think the need of the business was that we kept hearing the echoes of the business saying, we need better reporting. We need to understand what influence is our marketing driving on revenue. It was too hard for us to identify with the current setup. At the time, we knew we had Marketo Measure on hand, but it was just wasn't set up to allow us to answer those questions. So that's what really kicked off. It was like the business pressure of dying for these results and for this insight. So from there, we kicked off the process of thinking, okay, let's start learning about what this system can do. How should we be best setting it up? Reviewing all of the existing documentation that Marketo Measure provided. And then we realized that we had an accelerator through Marketo Engage that we could have leveraged. So we decided to use that to deep dive into the Marketo Measure area.
So you mentioned that you guys were doing first touch and last touch. What kind of gaps did that create in measuring marketing impact?
It's hard to be really specific on this one, but it just wasn't giving us the full picture of how marketing was influencing pipeline. We could see it at a certain degree, but it was unreliable. And I think looking now, having a pretty solid understanding of our Marketo setup, it hasn't been set up in the most optimal way for attribution. So in my view, it becomes very an unreliable way of measuring attribution. I'd say that generally we identified that it just wasn't answering the questions that we were asking.
After you started working with Attributa, what changed in your understanding of Marketo Measure, your implementation of Marketo Measure, the trust in the platform? Like, what changed after you started working with us?
I'd have to say it was a huge impact on our business to be opening our eyes to what Marketo Measure could actually deliver for the business. I mentioned earlier that had engaged to do an accelerator program with Marketo Measure. So we had some consultants that are specialized on the area to help us run through a 5-week program of investigating an audit of our implementation. What data did we have? Had we set up the instance in the correct possible way? All that sort of stuff. And at the time, we thought we were on the right track. We thought, actually, okay, we're pretty close to launching this thing. It seems like we're on the right track. And at that time, we had a few questions that were not able to be answered in direct detail. So that's how we discovered Attributa. It was through just Googling questions. We found the Attributa blog and realized that, hey, this Drew guy seems to know his stuff. Let's reach out. And that's what started the relationship. And then as soon as we kicked off the implementation, it was very clear to us the reasons why partnering with Attributa was going to be a valuable asset to our team, because straight off the bat, Drew highlighted some really key fundamental things that in our setup that made a huge difference in how we're able to optimize the whole implementation of the platform. And while I had thought that the implementation was going to be a fairly quick one, like maybe a month or two, it ended up being maybe 6 months or more, which is fine. But that was as a result of the business lagging in certain areas. And some of these things that just take a while to process, clearing out data, normalizing data, working with other teams to fix things, to sense check that it's set up correctly. There's a lot of background work to all of this stuff. And I think what I'd say is ultimately, I don't think it would be possible for many companies to be able to handle an implementation of Marketo Measure on their own without the long-standing experience that Attributa has to support them. Because I think if you don't have a partner like Attributa to guide you in the best practice of how to set up the Marketo Measure instance, you might set up something wrong. You'll end up reporting on the wrong data. You'll derive incorrect insights. You'll make decisions that are incorrect. So you'll have a massive flow-on effect on the business, and it's not worth the risk. And yeah, I think just the relationship that you build with Drew and the team it's such a pleasure working with Drew and the team. So I couldn't fault it at all. It's always a nice experience. And every time we meet with the team, I'm always learning something new. And yeah, I think we've got a huge amount of value from that partnership.
I'm really glad to hear that. So as of right now, what does your Marketo Measure setup look like compared to when we started the project?
Maybe a little hard to answer specifically, but I would say that I'm very confident in what the setup looks like now. We are very defined on all of the rules, the channels, the segmentations, the stages of attribution, the connections to Salesforce, what we're pushing into Salesforce with Marketo Measure. We turned off the Marketo program sync. It was just, there were so many different facets of the implementation that were pretty much blind to us from the start. And now I'm very confident that our implementation is in a very solid state and that we're able to get the data that we're seeing in Salesforce and in other reporting tools is far more accurate than it's ever been. And we have a lot more confidence. And I think that was one of the big things is we had lost a lot of trust in the data across the business because we didn't have a standardized reporting framework for attribution. And as a result of that, naturally, you have a lot of people coming into the business that are new, trying to ask these questions. So then, without a formalized and structured setup like Marketo Measure, they would naturally just start looking at other solutions. Like, okay, maybe we need funnel.io to measure these insights. Maybe it's Datarama, maybe it's Tableau, and it became a lot of system sprawl to a degree, and which was fine to a degree because people were eager to get these answers and trying their best to get them. But the problem was that there was no single source of truth then to really know what the data was telling them and if it was reliable or not. And then consequently, everyone had lost faith in the data. Every time you presented something, it was like, this MQL rate doesn't match what it says in Salesforce. Why is that? And it just created a lot of noise, a lot of distrust. The perception of it all was damaged to a degree. So we're now at a fairly lengthy process, but we're now at a much more comfortable situation now with the team that they can now say, all right, we do have a single source of truth. We can rely on the data to a higher degree. And now we're just in the process of, I guess, asking the necessary questions and trying to figure out the best way to display that data and in the best possible way. So we're currently using Tableau as the single source of truth to visualize all of the data, and it's looking very promising now.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, you mentioned early on in the conversation and earlier on in the project, we had a couple of quick wins that really helped build your confidence. Can you expand a little bit on those quick wins that we had early on in the project and what those were?
Yeah, One of them was we had Marketo Measure synced to Marketo Engage for all programs, and as well as the integration with Salesforce from Marketo Measure. And what that was causing us was like a duplication of touch points. And we had started the implementation of Marketo Measure in 22. It hadn't been used in a couple of years until we picked it up with Attributa. So over that course of time, thousands and thousands of touch points were created. So as you can imagine, that consumed a hell of a lot of data in Salesforce that was costing us money. The duplication of data meant that any sort of report they were using was unreliable. And the biggest, as soon as Drew came in, is like, hey, can you just check our setup? And you're like, well, we should be turning that off, that sync to Marketo Engage. That was a huge win. And that was I guess the big aha moment when I realized, like, why didn't Adobe consultants pick up on that when we engaged with them a few weeks ago? So it was a big eye opener. I was like, yep, okay, these guys definitely know what they're talking about. It did take a while for us to clear all of that data, but we got there. And yeah, I think that was the sort of the biggest first win that was like, okay, we're on the right track here.
Now, it sounds like you've also gained a lot of knowledge and confidence using the tool. Can you tell us a little bit about how your own personal growth has gone with relation to Marketo Measure since working with us?
Yeah, sure. I guess I've been using Marketo Engage for a number of years, and I guess I would think I'm fairly savvy to pick up a new tool and understand it. So I naively approached Marketo Measure with that attitude. And through the course of the working with Attributor through this implementation, it became very obvious to me that it's a tool that you really need a lot of experience in to know the ins and outs of the best way to set it up. It's not very intuitive, in my opinion, to get it set up in the right way. There's so many different settings you can do. It's very unique to your business, which is a good in one way, but also I think the evolution of the product hasn't kept up to speed with technology. There's a lot of lag in the dashboards. The documentation on best practice just isn't there. And that's where Attributor comes in, because that, as I mentioned, the blog post that caught our attention, that answered a lot of these questions that we just couldn't find on Adobe's site.
So, how has the trust in marketing data changed now that we're not quite all the way done yet, but we're really dang close? How has the trust in the data changed?
Yeah, like the trust in the data is getting there. It's come a long way. I think a lot of that trust has come down to us as a marketing ops team to communicate and being really transparent with how we're working with the tool and what our plan is to normalize and to create like a reporting framework, which was one of the recommendations from Attributor, is to define, okay, what is the attribution model that you're going to be using across the business? Like what, because natural bias amongst teams, they want to show results in the marketing team or whatever it is. So they might use the wrong attribution model to tell the story that they want to tell, as opposed to the truth of what the matter is actually saying. So a lot of those sort of fundamental learnings of how you should be, I guess, sharing what Marketo Measure can offer and like how you should be using the data within the business has had a big impact on the company's trust in the data, but the trust in knowing that what we are actually delivering is going to be reliable. As I mentioned, like we're still working through that process. It's not an easy one to do. There are many stakeholders in the business that you need to convince. Our method to get to a single source of truth, having only one reporting platform to show that, is is a really good step in the right direction to ensure that people, all of our stakeholders, are looking at the same data, the same attribution model, the same questions are being answered in the same way, and that's going to make a big impact on the business.
Love it. Love it. So, what kind of ROI story would you tell someone that is evaluating whether or not they should work with Attributa?
The ROI story for Attributor is that just the value that you get from the confidence in having a partner like Attributed to walk you through the best practice way to set up the Marketo Measure instance. that is a huge impact on how the business will function in the future. If, like I mentioned before, if you get it set up in the wrong way without having the experience of the ins and outs of the tool, without having the experience like Drew and Attributa have, you could be setting yourself up for failure. The small investments that you'll make to partner with Attributa will have a big impact down the line with your confidence in knowing that you've done it right the first time.
Okay. I'll ask my last question, Greg. Would you recommend that people work with Attributa?
I would 100% recommend people work with Attributa. I would say if you're thinking of going down the path of Marketo Measure, don't discount just having a chat with Drew from Attributa. It's going to save you a lot of heartache down the line. So definitely try it.
Awesome. We appreciate that, Greg. And thank you sincerely for your time today. I know your time is valuable. So really appreciate you being so open and honest about the experience of working with us. So yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. What I hope everybody learned today or heard today is that this wasn't a simple plug and play fix. Greg inherited a setup that really needed some TLC, and there's some real pressure to get this thing fixed. And we worked through it together over the course of, now it's been like 6 months, and it's in a much, much better place. The tool itself is in a much, much better place, but also the people in the organization are also just much more empowered to use the tool now through the training that's happened and all the learning that's happened throughout the engagement. So it hasn't just been about fixing the tool, it's also been about knowledge transfer and making sure that the team knows how to use this thing.
Yeah, the response that we've had from various stakeholders on the training with Drew has been phenomenal. Every time we have the training, I'm getting feedback from stakeholders like, that was so valuable, that was so helpful. I now understand like how to answer these questions. And it's giving them a lot of personal confidence. Not that Drew is showing them like how to build these reports, but he's showing them in the tool, getting them to actually use the Salesforce report and guiding them the whole way to answer their questions. But yeah, the training has been very invaluable to the team. And the way in which you train is a really unique way of doing it. And yeah, a lot of very good feedback from the teams.
Oh, I appreciate that. That's great to hear. Greg, again, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And looking forward to closing the project out with you.